Hello and welcome to another episode of the Type Tools podcast. I'm JC and we have our expert Scott here. Today we are continuing the conversation about cognitive development, and I want to start off with a spicy question. But before we jump in, if you guys want to follow along, cannot recommend clicking the link in the bio for the free handout enough. Like, it's going to help so much as we have these conversations for you to understand what we're talking about in terms of what the cognitive functions are, where they exist in your stack, and then if you know your type, you can also see your stack on that chart. If you don't know your type, I recommend booking a session with Scott at toolswithscott.com. All right, so spicy question. Can over identifying with your type, so like let's say I just found out that I am what I am, an INTJ, can it hold me back from personal growth? Like I'm thinking of the people who are like, so I know this INFP who, now that he knows about typology and we've told him his function stack, whenever he's doing something that's annoying, he's like, it's because I have SI. Like he'll be like, I'm cold. And we're like, it's not that cold. And he's like, I have SI. You don't have SI. So you don't know what cold is. Like that's an extreme and silly example, but do people use typology as an excuse to not work on their weaknesses?
I almost want to flip that back on you. Do you think people use their personality type as an excuse?
That INFP sure does.
Yeah, I think people will get away with everything they can get away with if they can get away with it, especially if there's a certain idiosyncrasy or issue that they have, and usually the introverted functions are the ones that move that dial. We did a session, an episode a couple weeks back on cognitive compatibility. So when you have introverted sensing, they like to be comfy, and they're going to seek out their personal comfort. It's what they're going to do. If they are allowed to do it, they will, especially if it's in the child slot where it's naive and optimistic and it's going to come out, but in this sort of clunky way, which is true for my type and for INFPs who both have introverted sensing third. Your child slot, it's opposite, which is what is the experience I'm giving to other people? Extroverted sensing is in the trickster slot. So where the most egregious behavior will come is that third slot for everybody, for everyone. So we're picking on an INFP, but INTPs will do the same thing in a slightly different way because it's not the same type, but it'll be a similar thing. It'll be a lack of consideration for other people's physical experience, uh, and and some people will enjoy that. They'll be like, "Oh, good, he's going to good because now I know how to give him a good experience," says the extroverted sensor. Okay, I'm going to give him a good experience, and that'll make him feel better. But if another introverted sensor is there, they'll be like, "Your comfort, my comfort. What do you mean your comfort? My comfort. Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to argue about this. I'm just gonna go do my comfort. You do your comfort, I'll do my comfort. If we can do our comfort together, we can get along. If we can't, we won't. With the introverted functions, there's almost a selfishness. And it depending on the introverted function, the flavors will be different. So introverted sensing, it's like, no, my comfort matters. Like, of course. And then if it's introverted thinking, it's like, okay, well, you can think whatever you want, but obviously I'm going to think this, just so you know. And you could tell me all you want, but like if I don't agree with it intellectually, it's just not right. And then introverted feeling, I'm good. I know this is good. I don't actually need anyone else's input. I've discovered that this is something good and valuable, and your opinions don't matter. And then like extroverted thinking is this is the thing that works. I'm not responsible for what I think. What I think actually doesn't matter. And in point of fact, don't try to make this about what I think. It's no, they said it and they said it, and this is information from other people. And what do you mean my thoughts? So so I guess what I'm pointing at here is that's going to come in the trickster function in the child slot. It's going to come in those spots, that sort of selfish behavior. And so back to the question, absolutely, absolutely, types will use their and they don't even need to know their type. You don't need to know your type to use it as an excuse. You just will do that. It'll just be a normal thing that you do, and people be like, you know, how how could how could an INTJ be so emotionally ignorant? How could an INTP be so physically unaware? How could any, it's for every type. And they do socially or functionally frustrating things in that specific space across the board. Everyone will do it. And it just depends on how. And since it's a lot of effort for those types to work on that, if they can not work on it, they won't because it's really hard. And so everyone will do that. So, absolutely, people will use their natural preferences. And if they know them and they can excuse their bad behavior, they will until there's a clash, there's a conflict, there's a problem that requires that they stop being so ignorant, and then they'll develop it, but maybe they won't want to, maybe they won't accept the shift, maybe they'll fight, maybe conflict will emerge, maybe they'll leave the situation so that they don't have to work on it. All of those things emerge all the time.
So the first time I met with you, I think I asked you, it's like one, I wanted you to confirm my type, but two, I was like, I want to work on my shadow stuff. Like I want to know all my weaknesses, know all my blind spots, and specifically work on those. And I can't remember your exact response, but it was something along the lines of that's raw or that's hardcore. So my inference from that is that most people don't come to you wanting to work on their weaknesses. So for those people that do, or for those people that are, getting into typology and they're discovering like, oh, crap, I have weaknesses. How do you go about directing people in terms of what they should develop? How does one decide what to develop?
It comes down to what problems are you trying to solve. So if your behavior is causing huge challenges that you care about fixing because the potential future outcomes are terrible. It's like so I have extrovert intuition, so I look to see what do people want. I usually don't try to tell people what they want, so I'll sort of pull it out of them. And a lot of times people will come to me being like, I want to work on my weaknesses, but really what they like is a pill to solve their weaknesses immediately. And I understand that because climbing Mount Everest is really, really hard. And that's why a lot of people don't climb Everest. Now, if we go back 50 years climbing Everest, they didn't have the oxygen tanks, they didn't have all the Sherpas, they didn't have the base camp with the medical professionals to help you if you had altitude sickness. So now with some of the tools and abilities we have, typology being one of them, we can climb Everest more safely and easily because we have it doesn't mean you don't have to move your body and walk up, and it doesn't actually make it easier. It just, well, it does make it easier. It's still hard. It's still very hard. And that's why when you said that to me, I was surprised because a lot of people actually, in reality, don't want to work on the things that they struggle with. They actually would prefer just to have it fixed. For some people, they want to feel as if they want to fix the problem because that feels good, because that makes me a good person, because I want to work on my weaknesses. But then when it comes down to actually executing, you'll discover that working on the hard thing is really hard, and then they may change their mind. And also, it's not necessary that everyone develops all their weaknesses. Sometimes you can outsource that, but there is a level of personal awareness and ability. So for instance, how are you going to appreciate so going back to our previous episode, you talked about how your friend was really good and socially gifted and you wanted to learn that. After struggling trying to navigate that space alone, how did it feel to have the added expertise of your friend's skill set helping you develop?
It felt a lot less confusing and overwhelming. And this points back to something else you said in the previous episode about finding a safe space to develop those functions, because I was able to have a really candid conversation with her where I said, I am trying to work on this thing. You are really good at this thing. Can I ask you, like, what will seem like obvious questions to you about why you interact with people the way that you do. And so if you can have that very transparent relationship with someone who has an ability that you're trying to gain, it just accelerates your growth. It's so much easier, it's so much faster.
Absolutely. So usually there's a period in the lives of people attempting to work on something difficult when they try to solve it alone for a while, or they ignore it and it piles up and explodes their lived experience. It's this thing that's sort of hovering over them all the time, and they try to deal with it, and and then they get exhausted and they get tired, and then they finally break and they say, will you teach me how to work on this? And there's a greater gratitude when they've gone through that process of struggle. And so now, instead of taking someone with that skill set for granted, right, which is what would happen if they didn't go through all the challenges and have that intrinsic gratitude for their ability and skill, now that exchange is less, it's more healthful. It's less, well, I don't want to say the word, but it is less parasitic. It's less take. It's because now you can extend an enormous amount of gratitude. So in the previous episode, we talked about a plumber coming in to solve the problem after they flooded their basement, after they spent hours and hours, and then the plumber was able to come in and quickly diagnose and know what tools were needed, solve the problem, and probably help get all the water out of their basement, help them, get back to baseline. The gratitude those people would feel towards the plumber for doing his job would be so uplifting and beneficial for the plumber because he gets to be lauded and appreciated for his skill set. And I think that that is essential for how you navigate these really challenging things. After trying to climb Everest alone with a rope and a light jacket for some reason and being bitter cold and making it 100 feet, and now you get a climbing expert and they say, oh, well, let's get you an oxygen tank and let's do some elevation exercises so you can get acclimated to this elevation. And let's do this and let's do this. And now you go, and it's still hard, but you can be very grateful for the wisdom and expertise that's being provided to you. And so that's why a lot of times people have to hurt for a while before a healthy exchange of learning can take place. And they know from their experience what to appreciate and what to look for in the people around them because they did the work and it didn't work. And so now I want to do that better, and I'm going to find someone who knows how to do it. And their awareness helps them be more accepting of the the skills and abilities that are given to them. So again, not to be super abstract, they're really grateful for the plumber knowing how to fix pipes and knowing how to fix plumbing and sewage and all of these things. And so yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think, all of this takes time and energy and focus, especially working on the lower functions. And so what is the trade-off? If you decide to work on them, is it like you just develop a bunch of strong weaknesses over time?
Hmm. I actually don't think the best approach is to develop a bunch of strong weaknesses. I suppose it's true. If that's all you're doing, you will be exhausted and you won't be giving the world your greatest gift and ability. So it's more about avoiding disaster and not spending all your time becoming a plumber. Because at the end of the day, the plumber is going around to all these houses when they have a problem and fixing the problem. But you yourself only have plumbing issues once or twice a year. So it doesn't actually make sense for you to spend 2 years in technical school to learn everything about plumbing. Now, you can if you were really interested in going that route, but there's so many domains in life. Do you want to become a florist so you can get a good bouquet for your wife? Do you want to take 12 courses on baking cakes so you can bake your own wedding cake? Do you want to take a bunch of DJ course? I don't know why I'm thinking about a wedding, but here we are. Like, do you want to be your own DJ? Do you want to teach all of the dancing lessons? The answer is we don't have enough time to become a perfect expert in every domain, and so it makes sense for you to avoid critical failure. So I feel like with those lower functions, the answer is know enough to not destroy your life. So for instance, on the plumbing route, know enough not to dump, you know, 5 pounds of oil or fat down the drain because that's going to clog it. Know enough to not cause problems. But when a problem does arise, and you know that you don't know what you're doing because you've experienced not knowing what you're doing, you know quicker to call an expert and get their help in that domain because they do it every day. They do it every day. And everyone is gifted in a certain way. So I actually don't think it's really worth your time unless, again, unless you're really driven and you really want to develop every one of your weakest functions. I think you just need to know yourself well enough to know when it's too much for you. And you need to know yourself well enough not to cause critical failures. Like from an electrician perspective, don't plug 70 devices into the outlet. Just plug in, a power strip and one plug, because then you're more likely to have a power outage. So just do less dumb things in but you don't need to be an expert. So know enough not to get into serious trouble is what I would say about those lower functions. And then if it's something that you deeply desire, that you deeply want, then I think that justifies working on one of those really low functions.
So bringing it back into the concrete realm, when I was developing the FE, which I think I talked about last episode, emulating my friend who's an ENFJ, so she is really good at that. I have found that I am much more flexible so I can adapt to different situations, but I still check in with her. So an example would be I had to send a very diplomatic email. I drafted the email based on my experience of what my friend would have written in the email, and then I sent it to her just to double check, like, hey, I know this is a blind spot for me. I want to make sure that I'm not going to basically do the opposite of what I'm trying to do and offend someone. And so I think it's what you're saying is a good point. Like you have to know enough to know you don't know it and not overconfidently overstep.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree completely.
To stay in the more concrete realm, can you give examples of how people could start developing certain functions? And we can just stick to one example. So, how can intuitive types start developing sensing functions?
Yeah. So what you'll find with intuiting and sensing people is they tend to hang out with themselves. So this is probably one of the, and then feelers tend to hang out with feelers and thinkers tend to hang out with thinkers. And that's kind of it. That's kind of, and then, there's a little hodgepodge of everybody. But the biggest line that I've seen is intuitives hang out with intuitives and sensing hangs out with sensing. And so what'll happen is the and both of them kind of think, oh, our way is better, right? So there's a natural bias towards your preference of thinking or perceiving the world. And with the intuitive types, what you'll find if you're trying to develop sensory, first you have to stop thinking that everyone that's not intuitive and super conceptual is not as smart as you. A lot of times that's kind of how it comes off is these people, they just don't know. They don't know the deep. They don't know the wondrous. And and again, it's just sort of a bias towards your own view of the world, which everyone will have. So I'm not calling intuitive types out, sensing people do it also. The what so the benefit of leaning into the sensory as an intuitive is that you will be more stable because the sensory is by nature grounded. It's real. It's actual. It's happening. It did happen. So what you'll find is the intuitive types are way more likely to spiral about the future. They're way more likely to not be able to drive their car because they're thinking about some event and they're not paying attention to the sensory. They're more likely to do that, and as a result, maybe they get a driver, maybe they get a maid to clean their house because neither of them want to be doing those sensory tasks. And in order to develop it, you have to first decide that that would be helpful and good for you, right? It's because it would represent a functional shift. Your preference is to talk about concepts. My preference is to talk about concepts. But I like my life a lot better after having spent a lot of time in the gym doing physical things. I like my life better after having done blue collar jobs for 6 years. I like my life more. And I am by nature an intuitive, abstract person, but I've developed a fuller, just on my end. I'm not saying other people would necessarily think my life is full. I feel as if my life is more full because I've engaged in these concrete places. I can sit and have a conversation about cookie recipes and not want to evaporate in my chair, which is where I started. And now I'm like, no, good food is delicious, and being able to make good food for myself because I tweak the recipe just right is great. I like being able to do that for myself. And then on so to flip to the sensory, so the sensing types are all in the now or in the past, right? If you're introverted sensing, you're oriented towards the past. What happened? What did happen? What was the price of eggs, 4 years ago? And they'll remember. And then what was the make and model of the Ford Chevrolet in 57, and how was that different than 58 if they're a car person? Or and they just remember the past and it's very clear to them. And so when they get with those abstract people, they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What actually are you because they're looking for real. They're looking for the real thing. And actually, as a result, as I'm in this podcast, I try to think what's an actual example because my preference is to just talk abstractly. So every now and then I'll talk about a plumber, or every now and then I'll talk about a real person that I know. And that can make it more real and more grounded and more functional and more useful and more stable. And so the benefit for the concrete person learning the abstract is they get to have a better sense of where things are headed, where their own life is headed, where they're going, what could happen, what might be. This is the realm that the abstract people swim in all the time. They're like, well, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Where am I headed? What are my goals? So they're in the future, they're not in the present. And by that, I just mean the things that they're talking about are in the future and not in the present. Whereas the concrete people are like, hey, let's go get a bite to eat. And they're not thinking, I don't have enough money. They're not thinking about saving. They're not thinking about, what will my life be in 10 years? Am I going in a direction that I want? Because they're so absorbed in the environment. And so just a little hint of future focus can impact them enormously. So they don't have to be worried about switching jobs, which could be terrifying for like an ISTJ or an ISFJ when they've done the same thing for 25 years. So it makes the sensing types more capable to pivot when when things are emerging around them that they don't understand and that don't make sense to them, because that's where the abstract people swim in. So for the intuitives, learning sensing grounds you. It makes you more solid and more real. It makes you more capable in the moment. It makes you more respectful of the past. And that is important because we're still alive as a species because we've iterated on things that we've done before. And with the concrete people, it's important to recognize that doing things differently or in a new way might be better and faster and quicker and happier and more noble. And so for the concrete people, understanding how to navigate change and the future will free them up from making dumb mistakes in the moment or feeling overwhelmed with the chaos that's coming at them because they've lived their life in such a way to avoid it. And so I'm phrasing it more how an introverted sensor would use it. So they like stability, and the extroverted sensor is always moving. And so they aren't building a future. And so what you want is the concrete types learning to handle chaos in the future and having someone say, instead of doing the same thing you've been doing better, let's try doing it this new way. I hope I'm not being too abstract. A concrete example would be I talked to a guy that runs tow trucks. He's an ISTP, and I was like, oh, okay. So what are you thinking of doing in the future? And then he was really thoughtful, because ISTPs are really thoughtful, TI dominant. And he thought for a while, and he's like, well, you know, um, I've been thinking about going into UFC fighting because they're really capable with their bodies and they're really physically oriented. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Just be careful about not getting injured because in order to be really successful in the UFC, you kind of have to really go at it hard. And probably most guys won't make it to the top. So if you're interested in making a living, it would be extremely difficult, but possible. And he's like, yeah, I really like my job right now. I like we go when the police dispatcher calls us, especially if there's a wreck or something like that. So we have the the radio and we'll fall in when they need a tow truck. And I was like, yeah, well, one thing you could do, so could future, is you could find a group of guys that are really good at tow trucking, and first you could get your own truck so that way you have autonomy, and then eventually you might be able to get more trucks, and then you could teach other people how to be really good at your job, and you could manage a team of trucks. And he's like, yeah, my brother does that. I was like, yeah, well, yeah, so that's something you could get done in as short as like 4 or 5 years. And he's like, oh, that's great. Yeah. And so for the sensing types, they're so in the moment. And so the abstract types can help them figure out where they're headed and where they're going. And that's kind of how we can both help each other.
I have a complicated question next. So in the preferences episode, we had kind of talked about accommodating, meaning how to tailor your approach to the person's preference. I think a lot of people will relate to the experience of needing to convince someone of something. So whether you're in sales and you're trying to convince someone to buy your product, or you have a relationship with a family member or a spouse and you're trying to convince them of an important medical need or something like that. I find that working on the T function, like working with someone else's T function, to be really difficult because that's where you're trying to kind of convince them. So, do you have any tips for this is kind of not self-development, but pushing someone to develop in these different areas? Like if I needed to convince someone with TI of something, how would I get them to come to a conclusion faster? Because I can't conclude for them. They have introverted thinking, but how do I get them to do that?
First, so that's going to be true of all introverted thinkers, all introverted thinkers. Now, depending on where the introverted thinking, if that's the portal by which you want to convince them, it depends on where it lies in their functional stack. So if it's a low TI user, don't give them tons of information from different sources, but do give them information from different sources. Say, this is what this person thinks. This is what this person thinks. So you do the TE, but you don't flood them because it's a low function. So you'll flood them and they won't know what to do with it if you give them too much. So if it's a inferior TI or a child TI, just especially with inferior TI, just give them 2 or 3 sources max. Don't give them more than that ever. It's just not going to go well. With child, you can give more. And just understand, but I guess what I'm saying is really with that inferior function, just be really careful with it. Don't overwhelm it. It's going to cause problems. So 1 or 2 things to consider and stop. And don't give them a ton of information. Say, here's something you could look at that talks about what I'm trying to tell you. They're not going to read a book. They're not because that's TI. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort, especially if it's in the bottom slot. If you're going up, then there's going to be more capacity to take it in and absorb it. So if you're giving me a bunch of abstract information, that's going to overwhelm an ISTP, even if you have a lot of sources. So
So
just
for
think
like a
about the
concrete type, regardless of where the TI sits, giving them too much information is going to be overwhelming, too much abstract information.
too much abstract information for a concrete type is going to overwhelm them. It will. So you have to kind of look at it from a from multiple views. right? Because a function doesn't exist in a bubble, because it doesn't. And so, like for an INTP, you can say, this person said this person said this person said this person said this. Go ahead and look into these things and see what you think. And the INTP will be like, great, I'm going to do that. I'm good at this. And an ENTP is going to be even more rapid at that process. They'll be like, oh, great, yes, because they can pivot conceptually really rapidly. And they'll decide for themselves. Probably in those cases, INTPs will take more time. ENTPs will take less time and probably not pursue it quite as deeply because they're more interested in broad. So they're going to want a lot of different sources, and then they'll arrive at their opinion when they arrive at it. And they don't want to be constrained too much by time. And then like an ISFJ, just make it more social. Here's social considerations. Here, but in every case with the TI, let them think it over. Let them think it over, and they will actually, if they care about the topic, they will actually think it over. Whereas some people will be like, let me think it over, but really it just means I don't want to listen to this. Just leave me alone. Um,
And if you do have a
whereas
personal relationship with them, because if they have TI, it means they have FE. If you tell them it's important to me that you come to a conclusion on this.
beautiful. Yes, exactly. And the higher up the FE, the more important your personal interest and care will be to them. And the lower the FE, unless you're like a crucial relationship, it won't actually matter a great deal because they don't have a lot of FE. It just won't, they will be less responsive to peer pressure, I guess is what I would say. Whereas an ENFJ, they'll be like, okay, well, I don't really want to think about it too much, but I can tell that they care about it a lot. Okay, I'll go through the work. And the INTP will be like, okay, look, well, they're really passionate about it. Is this interesting? Do I care about this information? I don't want them to feel bad, but I'm actually not going to do this. And so depending on the type, but the core, the thing that fits for everybody is they need to figure it out for themselves. You will not force them to agree with you. And and I felt that before, and I'm just telling you it doesn't work. TI people, and I would argue most pointedly the INFJs and the ISFJs because they have TE tricks. I realize this is getting really complicated really fast. The core thing for all of them is they have to figure it out for themselves. They have to figure it out for themselves.
And for a TE user, how would you convince them?
Tell them what you think, and they will determine for themselves if you're a credible source. So for the TE people, credentialing matters because they're outsourcing trust on the subject based upon other people's belief in you. So if you have a higher position that you've arrived at by getting schooling or credentialing, you're going to be more reliable because they don't want to evaluate it for themselves if they can avoid it. They just want to know that you're a trusted expert. And then if it becomes important, they'll scrutinize further. But usually they'll be like, okay, he's an MD, he knows doctor stuff. I'm good. And so they're going to be more trusting of the letters next to your name because what that means is you've been vetted by the tribe. The tribe has vetted you. I care about the tribe vetting you. Thus, your credentials represent tribe saying this person knows what they're talking about. And 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 consequently, a lot of times the TI people be like, okay, well, this really smart guy said this. I'll figure it out for myself. To be fair, he is. They'll decide for themselves whether. So they'll be like, okay, you're the president of the United States. I get that. So you're in a position of power, but like I just, so the credentialing matters less, and what matters more is if they agree intellectually with what's being said. And again, so some people say, well, I do both of those. Well, fine, fine. When we're coming down to a functional stack, what what do you actually do most? Do you spend a lot of time? Do you genuinely spend an enormous amount of time vetting the truth of the thing and going through the research and spending time digging down, asking yourself, does this make sense to me? Asking yourself this, or are you spending more time saying, that's an expert, I'm going to listen to that. That's an expert, I'm going to listen to that. And also, there's going to be more of a value consideration. Is this information that I value? Is this good information? And that's an FI thing.
Okay, so
So,
I have this working theory about TE where it rejects information if it's not useful or functional. So,
mhm.
like, if someone were to inundate me with information, I don't care about it if I don't see a use for it. And so, one thing I found is I can kind of hack with my FI if I can figure out what the objective is or change what my perception of the objective is to something I care about, then I can suddenly consume and care about that information. So, an example would be I had a friend who was texting me, like narrating her day to me, and I was just like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Like, I don't know what to do with this. And then I realized that the objective wasn't to learn something or to have an interesting conversation with this stream of consciousness narration. It was she was lonely and it was an emotional bid. And so, with the objective being, this is a relationship I care about, I want to make this person feel seen and heard. Suddenly, all that information she was giving to me was important to me because it was in relation to the objective of maintaining this important relationship.
Yeah, I know an ENFP who, like, this is probably 5 years ago. He made fun of me all the time, because don't put me in a box. I'm special. I'm unique. It's me. It's me. It's me. This type thing is stupid. This is a waste of my time. And it was a close relationship, so I'd engage with him regularly, and then he'd joke about it, and of course I'd get mad because I'm like, no, what do you mean? This has it's accurate. Like, and he's like, yeah, but I don't like it, was essentially the exchange. And later he discovered that he could feel important and capable and smart when he showed his capability and ability to use it in action with his friends. And then he spent hundreds of hours learning everything about it, just absorbing it in at a speed that's crazy to me. ENFPs, when they like something or they like to be seen as intellectually important, and everyone does. I don't want to make this be a call out for ENFPs, but because it's not, I'm just saying this is something that they'll do. They'll be like, this is the good information. I've determined that it's good. Now I will learn it. And after that, we would have advanced typing conversations, deep things, and he would know things that I didn't know because he's just absorbing all this information because now he sees the social value of knowing the information, whereas before it was a joke. This is dumb, this is a waste of time. And then he realized that he could engage with his friends in this really cool, unique way, like a magician almost, and unpack their dreams and what they may like. And he was interesting and he was cool and he knew all the things. And when I talked to him, he wouldn't think that he was smart, but I would think he was smart because ENFPs are kind of worried that generally that other people might think that they're dumb. And then the TI people are like, no, I don't think that. What do you mean? And they're confused at the insecurity because they're like, no, well, if I knew what you knew, I wouldn't be worried about that. That's crazy that you're worried about that because I thought he was brilliant and super capable, but he didn't think that. He just thought he was cool and interesting, which is what FI and NE are going to do. They're like, I'm cool now and I'm interesting. People are interested in what I have to say. But the logical content was worrisome. He's like, well, Scott's actually a lot better at that. And what does Scott think? And I'm like, no, no, no. On your own, without me, you're doing good. And but that insecurity remained because he needs the TI people telling him that it makes sense because he's TE. And so he needs tribe feedback to say, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart. Whereas the TI people are like, I am smart. Even if they're dumb, they'll be like, I identify as being smart. So I'm not worried about that. And the thing they worry about is, am I a bad person? Am I a bad person? I don't know. I need feedback from the tribe to tell me that I'm a good person. Otherwise, I worry that I'm a bad person because they have FE. So they need to get that value feedback from the tribe.
So I'm going to work on testing my theory, but I kind of want to just vet it by you. So do you think if I'm trying to convince a TE person of something, I can kind of give them the objective first by leveraging a value they care about? Say, I'm giving you this information because of this value I think you care about. And then I think maybe that'll help them integrate the information a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That would be a really effective strategy.
All right, I'm going to try it. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our conversation for today. We talked more about development. Definitely check out part one if you didn't already, and check out the handout down below if you haven't done that already. And if you are interested in working on your development and you want to accelerate that process, definitely check out toolswithscott.com. You can book a session with Scott, work directly with him over there.
Yeah, thanks everybody.